I know one woman, she was explaining this to me. She was like, I had one boyfriend who was always honest with me, never love bombed me and never cheated on me. And I had another boyfriend who would love bomb me all the time and cheat on me behind my back. And I like that relationship better. Alex Datesike recently, he's a PhD student, and he posted this one statistic basically showing that men are more likely to settle for women that are 8s and women are more likely to settle for men that are 5s. And that, which kind of goes opposite of the points that I've just been making. But the reason why that isn't valid is because most women find most men to be 5s. That's the reason why. What happens is there's some great statistics that they'll show this. Basically, women will push attractiveness levels for men all to the left, meaning guys who are actually average, they'll rate them as 2s. And guys that are like 8s, they'll rate them as 5s. Like they'll push everything to the left in a short-term context. And then there's a few guys up here at the top, very small number of guys that are like 10s. Whereas men rate women 5s as 5s, 6s as 6s, 7s as 7s, 8s as 8s. You'll find that often men will rate a group of women that are moderately attractive as being moderately attractive. And often women will rate men who are moderately attractive as super average. And because of that, that's the reason why you find this whole situation to be the way that it is. Men's physical attractiveness doesn't like evenly distribute the same way women's does.
And I guess that makes sense, because I feel like when I'm thinking about attractiveness, I'm honestly not thinking about what they look like.
Well, did you previously, when you were in college and high school, did you care more about what someone looked like back then?
100%.
Yeah. So this is another phenomenon that women tend to look for more displayed alpha qualities when they're younger. And then as they get older, his ability to procure resources becomes more important.
The looks factor, they've always stayed the same to me. I've always liked the same guy from the time I was in high school up until now physically.
Have you ever dated a guy that initially you didn't find physically attractive, but there were other qualities?
A lot of times, like most times.
So you understand men don't do that. Most men don't see a woman that they don't find physically attractive and then, wow, she has a great personality. Now I want to, it doesn't work like that. Most of the time it doesn't do like that for men. I often hear women are like, yeah, I wasn't really interested in him. Just one after another asked me out over and over. Finally, I went on a date with him. Turns out he's incredible. It's like there's things men can do to overcome physical attractiveness in the beginning, especially in the very beginning. I'm not talking about the mother of your children. I mean, in the very beginning, physical attractiveness is so outrageously important to men that it becomes problematic. And again, if the man does not have a lot of options, then what happens is physical attractiveness is all he cares about.
So problematic meaning what?
Problematic meaning like he can't see red flags or that this is not a good partner to be with.
And women don't see red flags because why?
Women don't see red flags because like they may be overtly attracted to a man may be love bombing them. So situations where like, for instance, if you consistently, I know one woman, she was explaining this to me. She was like, I had one boyfriend who was always honest with me, never love bombed me and never cheated on me. And I had another boyfriend who would love bomb me all the time and cheat on me behind my back. And I like that relationship better. She enjoyed, and Jessica, you're shaking your head because you've probably seen a similar phenomenon, but like I've seen several women that would prefer to be lied to and love bombed by a man who's a cheater who gets appreciation from several other women than a boring man who is constantly honest with her the whole time. That's problematic for men when I see that happening over and over and over. And it's one of these really weird situations. I think, Jessica, I'll say this. You're successful at your job. You're outgoing. You're well-spoken. A lot of guys, the word women use is intimidated. They're not intimidated. I promise you the intimidate is that they have a preference. And a lot of times what will happen is a guy will be like, I want to come home and I want to feel like I'm in some control. I want to feel a certain level of peace. And what women hear when they hear that is like, no, you're just intimidated because I have a career. No, I've never been intimidated. I have never heard of a guy intimidated. That's the wrong word. The word is preference. I don't like for whatever reason, I don't like pickles. Just because I don't like pickles doesn't mean I'm intimidated by pickles. I bought a bed that's very comfortable, a Tempur-Pedic that's very comfortable because I want to sleep on a comfortable bed. I didn't buy a bed of rocks. And so if I want to date someone who's going to just consistently end up in conflict with me because they're just as alpha as I am, I can have a preference to not be with that person, but that doesn't mean I'm intimidated by them. And I think it's really bad when women give other women the advice that men are intimidated because you have a career, a master's degree, or whatever. It's not that they're intimidated. It's that they have a preference for peace. And long-term relationships happen when both of the partners can communicate with each other and then have a certain level of peace. It can't be a situation where they're constantly trying to one-up each other. That's why some men, I'm not always, but that's why some men choose that type of lifestyle.
And I get that. And I one thing I've researched a lot when it comes, like, men do want peace and women do too. We don't want drama in most scenarios. But when it comes to that, how do you kind of coincide having a career for intimidation and lacking peace though? Because you can argue that like, just like she could be tired from her job and just want to come home and be peaceful as well.
Yeah, well, that's great. And when you have those situations, I don't really think that's big of an issue. Also,
Okay.
when people work in the same field, like for instance, if two people were psychologists, if both people worked in sports radio
Yeah.
or something like that, I think that's a little easier because the two of you can work together to build an empire.
Yeah.
Think of like Layla and Alex Hermosi would be a great example, or like Grant Cardone and his wife. That would be an example of like two people who are both influencers who are working and pulling in the same direction. I think that's fine. I've seen couples on TikTok that make that work. I think what the issue is though, it's like, it's one of these situations where I had two female squadron commanders when I was in the Air Force, when I flew a KC-135. I was a navigator. When I had them, it was one of these situations where when they were with us, with all the men in the unit, there was a very, I don't know what the word, a very leadership and non-feminine quality to them where they were in charge and they let you know that they were in charge. And my whole concern was if they brought that back to their husband, that was going to be a very difficult relationship.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so like, that's again, a lot of people today now, they don't like the idea of gender differences, but there are. And in general, when a man leads and has masculine qualities, and in general, when a woman follows her man and has feminine qualities, those relationships in general tend to work better. It's not always the case. There's certainly women who are very alpha, who date men who act very beta, and they're happy in those relationships too. But for the most part, in general, most of the time, most relationships are going to work better that way.
Men are attracted to women because they have the femininity, because that's something they lack and they love that. So how do you kind of, if you were talking to a woman, and no offense, I don't think you know what it's like to be a woman, right? So how would you give advice to a woman who perhaps, this is more personal. I feel like I definitely have a bro vibe about myself and I love it. I can't help it. I mean, it's just who I am and what I do. I played sports for a living. If I were to ask you, like, how do I be more feminine? What would you tell a woman?
Well, it's not even more feminine. By the way, the fact that you're into sports, I think a lot of guys would find very attractive. I don't think
it's a lot of fake. It's a lot of fake attention, though. I've noticed.
You think so?
Just the stuff that you said about like the guys on my Instagram. It's just like, oh, she's pretty. She works in sports. It reminds me. So when I have people shadow me for work, they're bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. A lot of times I'm waiting around for a guy to show up for an interview, to be in front of his locker, to like show up for a quick one-on-one. And it's not as glamorous as they might think. Sure. So I think that that's what they think, or they think like, oh, I'm just going to come home and in my lingerie and give them fantasy football advice. That's not how that works.
There were a lot of girls doing that for a while. Do you remember that?
And I get it. And don't get me wrong, I was a fantasy analyst for a little bit, but it's just, I also need to shut it off. You know what I mean? Like, but I also have the balance of, I want to be watching the game and I want to be watching like 90 Day Fiance kind of stuff. Yes, it does help me in certain aspects, but I think a lot of it, I get so much attention on social media. They never approach me in public ever.
I don't think nothing you're telling me indicates to me that you'd be difficult to be in a relationship with. That doesn't seem the problem. And by the way, whether or not you're a cardiologist or you analyze QB quarterbacks, whatever the answer is, I don't think that's the problem. It's not the femininity or masculinity of the job title. I think what it is when we come home, every time I'm scrolling on Instagram, do you question whether or not I'm trying to go talk to this girl? Is it a constant necessity for there to be jealousy or trying to pick fights with me? Do you tell me how I feel or do you ask me how I feel? Do you exaggerate when we have conversations? Do you attack me or do you accuse me of things that you have no evidence for repeatedly? Like for instance, let's say a couple's been together for 5 years, man's never cheated. And then he goes off and he's like talking to one of his female friends and she's just like accusing him of cheating. At some point, she needs to say, I have enough reference experience to know that my man isn't cheating. And I need to be comfortable with this because if I don't, it's the constant accusations and the constant drama, the constant exaggerations and the constant attacks that drain a man of his life energy. And that's what takes away peace. So a lot of times women are like, well, no, I feel like I'm insecure in this relationship and I need validation from my man. And so I'm going to do something. I'm going to lash out to get that validation from him. And in doing so, she thinks she's fixing the relationship when really what she's doing is emasculating her man and she's draining him of energy, like an energy vampire, right? Okay. She's sucking the energy out of him. I'm constantly having to remind you that everything's fine in this relationship. And here's the other part, Jessica, that's really strange. And there's plenty of studies that show this. There's studies on what's called sexy sons hypothesis. And there's other studies on what's called mate choice copying. And this is the concept that women tend to find men more attractive when other women find those men attractive. Makes sense, right? So if I'm going to say, I have one of two situations. One, Jessica, you could be dating a male sports reporter, and this male sports reporter has access to the best parties, is traveling all around the world. And in general, when you guys aren't together, he's at places where there's other beautiful women around. You're comfortable with that because you're comfortable where you are in your relationship. That's great. You understand that. But other women might find him attractive, and you might find that attractive as well. And that could help with your relationship if you were secure with it. Another option is you and your man move out to Wyoming. You do a podcast together. You never come in contact with any other women like that. But the thing is, women tend to find men more attractive when other women find them attractive. And so it becomes this like push-pull situation. Can you be with a man and then still provide him the peace that he needs at the end of the day? Can you do so and like unnecessarily create chaos in a situation? Do men do this too? Absolutely, they do. But here's where the rubber meets the road. You and I were talking about this beforehand about certain situations with SA accusations, stuff like that. And one of the issues is it's a small group of men who are narcissistic, who end up love bombing the women. But these guys are so good with women. You know those? Have you seen that on Facebook? There's these groups called "Did We Date the Same Guy?" Have you ever seen these?
Yeah, of course. I have. I'm subscribed to like 5 cities. Yes.
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 So are we dating the same guy? So it's a small group. If you find out it's a small group of men that are competing for these men who are just incredibly charismatic, and they may actually suffer from NPD, narcissistic personality disorder. About 5% of women suffer from what's called borderline personality disorder. And those are the ones who are like Amber Heard. Oh, Johnny Depp hit me, but he didn't hit me actually. But then I pooped on his bed, but I forgot to leave that part out. So what happens is there's this small group of men and women at the top that sort of like cry wolf and make the rest of the population have to sort of pay for that. Does that make sense? But what happens is now, because of what Amber Heard does, now nobody wants to believe all women anymore. And you should, for the most part, no one's going to claim SA for the most part, unless they have some kind of mental disorder, if it didn't happen. And the opposite is true. Right. Often you'll have men who will often be like accused of stuff like that, and they're not guilty of it. So that's the thing that happens, but it gets exasperated to where it's like all men or all women. And that's where it becomes problematic. But anyway, you were asking specifically about a relationship. And the thing is, just do you provide peace? Or is there some level of loyalty, right? Do I feel like we're in the same situation? If you and I go to a party together and we're dating, are you going to have my back, or are you going to just tell embarrassing stories about me to other women that are in the party? Are you on the same team as me? Cody Sanchez, she has really great saying. She was like, when me and my partner are out together, we're always on the same team. Always. We would never talk bad about each other to anyone else in private. And so that's a really important thing to do. Are you testing your partner all the time? If I'm constantly being tested as a partner, that means you're not secure with where we are in the relationship. If you're not secure where we are in the relationship, that's not me being, if you're draining the energy from me, that's not me being insecure. And that's not me being intimidated. That's just a preference that I have to not be drained every day.
Yeah.
This is what I try to tell people. You always need the ability to walk away, which is a good thing and a bad thing.
Right.
If you're with somebody and you constantly have to accuse them or question them about whether or not they're cheating, a great idea would be to not be in that relationship for one of two reasons. Either one, they are cheating, in which case you don't need to be in that relationship, or two, they aren't cheating and you can't stop accusing them, which means you have a personal insecurity issue. That means that maybe you need to be single, work on yourself, and then at some point in the future, find a later relationship. Often, unfortunately, something that happens, and this happens for men and women, is that if you've been cheated on at multiple times in your life, you get to the point where you're in your early 30s, mid 30s, and then you just like immediately you see everything through that lens. Right. I know some women, they're like, well, they'll see a guy who's like really good looking and immediate. They're like, no, I've been cheated on guys who look like that. I'm not going to date a guy who looks like that. Stuff like that will happen. I know some women, several friends of mine, they're like, they used to date athletes. They're like, I'll never date an athlete again because I always end up getting cheated on. Stuff like that. You'll bring that baggage with you. And my whole thing is this, man, have enough self-respect, no matter who you are. Again, she might be the hottest woman you've ever seen in your life. He might be the biggest movie star you've ever, you might be his biggest fan. But if you are consistently questioning yourself about whether or not this other person is faithful, you probably should end the relationship. One, because they might not be faithful, or two, because they are faithful and you can't perceive it.